Today's guest didn't just reinvent himself once, he's done it 5 times. Rick Bleiweiss is my guest today, and he's always dreamt to be a performer, ever since he was a little boy. His 5 distinct careers included rock musician, record label executive, publishing leader, and then, just to keep things interesting, debut novelist at the age of 77. And today, he's added podcaster to the list. Rick's story blows up the idea that age equals obsolescence. His career proves something we just don't talk about enough: having meaningful work, creative expression, and professional impact are always available. Across every phase of his journey, Rick's blended the creative with the corporate. He's mentored talent, kept learning, and always says yes to what excites him next. Go for it wasn't just a slogan for Rick, but a way of life. This inspirational conversation about reinvention has so many nuggets that I feel are relatable, particularly to those who are late in their career in search for something new. So, without further ado, please enjoy Rick Bleiweiss and his clocking out journey. Rick, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here and good to see you too, Raymond.
Yeah, I'm excited about our conversation today, Rick. You and I connected a while back, and right from our initial conversation, the first word that came to mind for me, and as I really got to know your story, is reinvention.
Yeah, that's a fair word. I think I have reinvented myself a number of times during my life.
It really is quite remarkable when I looked at your career, and I was recently watching a podcast interview that you were conducting with Clive Davis, which we know is an icon in the music industry. And I was just thinking, I was looking back where you started your career in filmmaking to how that evolution occurred over the last several decades. And this word reinvention kept resurfacing time and time again. And I think it's just truly remarkable about the impact that you've been making in your industry. And I'm really excited about sharing your story with our listeners, primarily because if someone's listening and they're thinking that it's just too late to reinvent themselves because they're at some stage in their life and they just don't feel like it's possible to start something new, your story definitely is inspirational and can inspire someone who is at a place where they feel like they're stuck and is really looking for guidance and support to sort of like really do the work to reinvent. I think your story certainly does that.
Well, one of my, I guess, mantras, for lack of a better word, is you're never too old to chase the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. As long as you have the energy and you have the passion, why not? I mean, we don't shrivel up and die as we get old. And I think more seniors need to take the position. Look, many of them are very happy in retirement. They play golf or bridge or, something that really travel a lot. And that's great. But then there are a lot that really just kind of feel like, oh, my productive years are over. And I don't find that to be true. I find nothing wrong with retirement for others. I tried it. It didn't work for me. I just think if you have the energy and you have the passion, go for it. What the hell does it matter what age you are?
I love that. And I want to jump in and start asking you a bunch of questions.
Yeah, sure.
But before we get there, Rick, I always like to start with an origin story.
Okay.
And so let's first start with, tell us where you're from and where'd you grow up?
Okay, I grew up in Great Neck on Long Island in New York and Manhattan. And I was an only child. And I spent a lot of time doing only child solo activities. I had my own dice baseball league that I kept statistics on, and I had a Nerf basketball league, and I bought a PA set and did a radio broadcast to myself in my apartment. I wrote a sports newspaper. And I also fell in love with the guitar. I saw Gene Autry sitting on his horse Champion, singing Back in the Saddle Again, and strumming the guitar, fell in love with it, pestered my parents till we got a guitar, and that actually was the kind of the impetus and the start of what became my life and my career.
Wow. So you had the music bug at an early age. What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my mom originally was a singer on the radio. Then she became a housewife, a stay-at-home mother. And then once I went off to school, she became an administrator with NYU and then opened her own school for remedial learners in Toronto. My dad was a corporate executive, but he was also a painter and he was an inventor. He had over 400 patents. And he was a scientist. He worked with Einstein. He worked with Gustav Bucky. And he read a book every single night of his life. He'd come home from work. We'd have dinner. And we'd talk a little while. And then he'd go to his easy chair in the living room and read a complete book. And that happened every single day of his life, virtually till the day he passed.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. So it sounds like, though, your parents had an incredible influence over you, with your mom being a singer and your dad being also sort of in the arts to some degree. How much of that influenced your desire to want to follow in their footsteps?
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but virtually none of it. My dad was much more of a corporate businessman and an inventor and scientist more than anything else. When I knew my mother, it was long after she had stopped singing on the radio. The things that they gave me that really formed me, if you will, were they didn't prescribe a path for me. Were they happy that I wanted to be a musician? Not necessarily. Did they stop me? No way. They always felt follow your passion, and there's that word again, and they were truly like that for me. They supported me with the guitar. They got me classical guitar lessons. And they introduced me to a wide range of music. Back in the 40s and 50s, people were listening to, Pat Boone and Doris Day and people like that. And they introduced me to the Weavers and Huddie Ledbetter and Django Reinhardt and Miriam Makeba and country music. I got a really great musical education. They took me to a lot of Broadway shows, so in that way they affected me. But really, they left me kind of alone to follow the path I wanted to follow, and supported me.
Yeah, I feel that. It seems like at an early age, you had this real fire to pursue this dream. And just based on what I'm hearing so far with your interests, as the only son, they provided you with the support that you needed to flourish. And it seems like they recognized that and they were almost like enabled this sort of passion that was just instilled within you.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I first heard rock and roll, and at that point, I had been studying classical guitar, probably from when I was about 7 or 8. And I told my parents I wanted to play rock and roll guitar. And they said, in a very supportive manner, we have no problem with that as long as you also keep up your classical lessons. So, it was a fine compromise that made me a better musician for it over the course of my life.
So was picking a degree in college easy for you?
When I was a teen, because I was an only child and I had a mother who was, what's the best word I could use, a bit stifling. She was very concerned that I would be sick all the time, which I wasn't. But my dad suggested that I go into like teen therapy with a few other guys my age. And I did. I really liked it. And so when I went to college, I entered as a liberal arts major, but I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist. So I went to the University of Miami. That's where I started my college career, not where I ended it, but where I started it. And I walked into a zoology class, and there were frogs laid out on the lab stations and the innards on a chalkboard. And I looked at that. I said, there's no way I'm cutting that thing open. I walked out and I left the pre-med ideas behind. And I immediately transferred to what I thought would be a very cool life and program of radio, TV, and film. And I found that of everything, I liked film better than radio and TV. And so I ended up transferring to NYU, where I got my bachelor's and master's. And I studied filmmaking under a man named Haig Manoogian, who Scorsese was one of my classmates, and so was Bob Balaban. And Scorsese, in fact, dedicated one of his films to Manoogian, our teacher. He was quite an influence. The first time I saw one of Marty's films, I almost gave up filmmaking because I knew I wouldn't be as good as him.
That's really cool. So what was the driver of being interested in pre-med? What was the reason why you initially went down that path?
Well, it wasn't so much pre-med as it was psychiatry. You know, obviously that's part of pre-med, but it was more specialized than just generally pre-med. And I've always been fascinated with the mind and mine and other people's. And I just thought that would be a way that I would be interested in my job and I would be doing something good for other people.
Yeah, it's interesting how you sort of went down that journey very briefly and uncovered that all roads went back to the music. And then you honed in on filmmaking as sort of a driver. So what was your first job out of college?
Actually, my first job was in college. And that was as a rep for Colpix Records. That was a division of Columbia Pictures. And later on, they had the Monkees and other big acts. And when I worked there, they had a lot of what I call dreck. They hired me initially to get posters in record stores in the Miami area. And I did that so well, they started sending me records and had me promote radio stations. And because they had no local promo man down in Florida, in southern Florida. And so I did really well with the southern Florida station. So then they gave me the entire state. So I'm playing in a rock band, I'm going to school, I'm going to the beach, and I'm running around the state promoting Colpix Records. That was my college life for 3 years at Miami. And it was great, but I also realized I wasn't learning very much.
It sounded like a fun job.
Yeah. So when I got out of school, out of college, after my bachelor's, I wanted to be in film, but I also was playing in rock bands. And I got a job offer to work for Bruce Lansbury. He was doing the Wild Wild West and Odd Couple TV shows. But I decided not to move to L.A. because my band was on the edge of getting a recording deal, and I wanted to see that through and do that. And that deal never came through. And then I answered an ad for an assistant director, and it turned out to be for a porn company. And I decided against doing that. So then I started playing. Well, I was playing in bands. I mean, my first job after college was playing in rock bands. I mean, I did that for 15 years. I did it probably for 10 of those years exclusively as my life. You know, opened for Three Dog Night, Ruby and the Romantics, the Leslie West, the Young Rascals, and other acts. My band never had the success those acts did, but it was a hell of a ride. And I co-wrote a science fiction rock opera with the lead guitarist in the band. I was the bass player. And then I started playing weddings and bar mitzvahs in a society band. And this leads up to what my first real job was, other than as a musician. And I mentioned to this sax player who I played with in a lot of the gigs. He was an older gentleman who used to be in Broadway pit, orchestras. And I had mentioned to him, that I had this job working for Colpix. So one day he comes up to me and he says, I have a friend who lives in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and he owns every Weight Watchers franchise in the state of Wisconsin, but he's a piano player and he has a small record label, and he's looking for someone to give him some advice on what to do with it because he's not quite sure how to make it more successful. And you're the only person I know that has any record company experience. Would you talk to him? To make a long story short, I did. They flew me out to Whitefish Bay. I met with Ralph and his wife, Phyllis, who were the co-owners of this. The company was called Pleasure Records. Met with them, and around 4 o'clock, it was time for me to go to the airport to go back to New York. And they said, excuse us. They came back 5 minutes later and said, would you like to be the general manager of our company and run it? We'll set you up with an office in New York. We'll give you a budget to sign acts. And I said, of course. And that was my first job, being the general manager of Pleasure Records.
Wow. That is so interesting. I appreciate you sharing that story. And what came to mind for me, Rick, is your identity and how it's evolved. And I just wonder, with you being so passionate about having a successful rock band and creating music, to now you're running this record company, like, how does that transition happen? Where, like, did you continue working in the band? Did this new job become all consuming where you were all in? That sounds like a tremendous responsibility where you're now running this couple's company. Did you have any sort of feeling that, is this really the next thing for me? Because you said yes to it. And it sounds like throughout your career, the word yes is like, if there's an opportunity, you're on board. And I just wonder, how did that seems like a radical transition.
You know, it was all in music and rock and roll. So to me, at the time, it was not radical at all. It was a logical progression, possibly to the next step, to take what I knew. In a lot of the bands I was in, I was the leader, I was the songwriter, I was the arranger. I kind of had this left brain, right brain going. On one hand, it was creative, and on the other hand, it was the business side, and I was able to do both. No, I did not keep playing in bands when I started running Pleasure Records, and the more metamorphosis that came was that I started producing records. So I took the skills that I had from arranging and running it and started producing. And it was, I devoted myself full time to Pleasure. And in the studio, I didn't produce all the Pleasure records. I produced 1 or 2 of them. And then I produced way more a few years later. That was in 73 and 74, I guess, that happened, that I was with Pleasure. And then Pleasure got sold to a company called Pickwick International. They were a budget and children's company based in New York, big, but they had a full price division. They were distributing Delight Records with Kool and the Gang, and they had their own records. And I went to them to get better distribution because I got the records played on the radio, but I was having trouble at Pleasure getting the records into the stores. So I went to Pickwick to distribute us. Instead of distributing us, they bought the company, and I went along as the key man. They said the sale would only happen if Rick comes along, because they wanted me to run sales and marketing and promotion for their full-priced label. And I did, and that's where I started producing in earnest and produced records that were hits.
Wow. So when you were with the production company, did you sort of see a pathway of like what the end game was going to be in terms of the work that you were doing at that time? Like, did you have sort of a dream of having your own label or your own business at some point?
Not really. But the biggest dream I had would have been to be Paul McCartney, but or Mick Jagger or something like that. But I knew I didn't have the voice. So that was never going to happen. I also never believed that a rock star would survive past their 40s in terms of being still viable to the public. How little did I know back then? So, no, I've also spent part of my career as an entrepreneur with my own companies, not all in music. I always just lived for the day. Like you said, and if an opportunity came along and it seemed like a good one, let's go for it. I'm writing my memoir right now, and the working title is Go For It, because that's kind of what I've done my whole life. And no, I didn't have an end game. I just had let's take it one day at a time and enjoy the ride.
I love that mantra. Just go for it. So you started your career, your professional career, really in more of a corporate kind of setting, and you were building your experience. And it sounds like you had like side hustles along the way, things that you were doing on the side that almost filled your cup.
Yeah, totally. I produced over 50 singles and albums, have a Grammy nomination, had a record that popularized whistles and discos, and I had an act I produced that had 6 consecutive chart records. We were featured in the music bed in a Coke commercial, produced another record that the Harlem Globetrotters used for their live performances and on their TV show, The Popcorn Machine, another one that the NFL used as their intro and outro music during Christmas season. And I just always had fun doing all this. And I made a fair amount of money producing records. Then I managed some of the acts and put all the money I made back into managing the acts. Wow. But it was a fun ride. I would not trade it with anything. It wasn't always about the money. To me, it's like chasing the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. To me, the chase is even more exciting than whether I find the pot of gold or not. If you find it, it's great. If you don't, hey, the chase was a hoot.
Yeah, I love that, Rick. So was there a moment, though, throughout this experience working for, it sounds like you were with a couple of record companies.
Yeah.
Did you hit a point where things started to become repetition, in terms of, it doesn't sound like you hit a place of burnout, but it feels like things got less fulfilling and you were looking for something different, something more?
Yes, that occurred in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And it was when Napster changed the music industry. And it became way less fun. There was a little bit of burnout. And because the industry as a whole was starting to suffer financially with all the freeloading and everything else that was going on at the time, there was a lot of pressure to make every single act and every record a hit because there was no financial room to maneuver with losses, if you will. And that just took the joy out of it. Concurrently, the other major change was that all of these independent labels were bought up by major corporations. And the corporations infused their corporate rules. So instead of it being a freewheeling, fun industry, it became a corporate game. And that's way less fun.
Yeah, I remember the Napster phenomenon where it completely changed the industry overnight in a very unique kind of way. And I could see how over time that took its toll on your ability to add value in the industry, but also maintain that level of creativity that you liked.
Yeah, and the other thing that started happening because of that was, and I can't say it's universal, but I can say it was pretty prevalent, was a lot of record label executives would start blaming, and I'm not saying me in particular, but in general, and instead of feeling like you're working on a team, you're almost sometimes feeling like you're doing whatever you can to avoid having blame thrown at you. And it's all because the market was shrinking. I mean, one year, the record industry, I think, was a 14 billion industry. And a couple of years later, after Napster, it had shrunk to 9 billion. I mean, that's significant. It's grown back up again, but it's taken a while. And so during that shrinkage, if you will, there were a lot of people looking for answers, and many of them, instead of looking at themselves, were just looking to lay the blame elsewhere. And I just saw a lot of people hurt by that. And I just said, this isn't the industry it used to be. It's not the industry I want to be in anymore.
Yeah. So you recognized the industry was changing. You saw and felt it was far less fulfilling than it was in the early days. Did you start taking action before you left the industry in terms of leaning into something completely different? How did you start to make the transition out of the industry that you were in at the time?
Well, I didn't really, I kind of planned on retiring. So, I would have been, let's see, if that was, let's say, 2002, I would have been in my late 50s at that point. And so my then soon-to-be wife, second wife, and she was in the music industry as well. She was a senior executive in record companies, and she retired first. And then we decided I'd retire, and we were fortunate that when I announced my retirement, a number of the labels that I was working with hired me as a consultant. And so I really did that for a couple of years, and moved from New York to Ashland, Oregon, got married. And then I stopped doing any consulting, did a full retirement, and got bored out of my mind, and started being on boards of directors of nonprofits. I was on the board of directors of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the Ashland Independent Film Festival, the Ashland Emergency Food Bank. I was on the President's Advisory Board of Southern Oregon University for 10 years and chair of a couple of their departments. And I found that cool. I enjoyed giving back, but I also didn't find it fulfilling enough. And so my next door neighbor was a published poet. And she knew that I had done some writing, because what I haven't mentioned is, across my whole life, I did writing. I wrote magazine articles, I wrote some newspaper columns and things like that, just because I loved writing, and I submitted things and they got picked up. And she said she knew about my writing history. I told her about it. She said, join our writers group. Maybe it'll give you a flame. So I joined the writers group. I really enjoyed the people, and it did. It gave me a little push, and I started writing short stories. And those short stories evolved into the novels that I had published, the first one of which I was published when I was 77.
I want to go back to this decision to retire.
Yeah.
Because you worked a career for production companies. You worked this career in production, and you were in your late 50s. The industry was changing, and I can only imagine that you probably said to yourself, you were thinking, okay, comparing your life to sort of the traditional world of careers and longevity, and you had to have said to yourself that these are the signs that ultimately lead to retirement, and this sort of definition of what is the lifespan of a career. And you were following social norms, and you sort of went down this path of retirement, and you realized that, wait a second, you were doing all the things that a normal person would do. You would join the nonprofit boards, you probably went on some vacations, and you played some golf or whatever leisurely things people do. And so it's just interesting how the change in industry, the longevity of your career, you went into the path of retirement, but quickly realized that there was going to be some reinvention that Rick was going to uncover, and you ultimately did. But I just find it fascinating that you went through that process first before you realized that this is not my time.
I left primarily because it wasn't fun anymore. It was more stress and less fun. I always had a firm belief that I would be sort of like a cat, that no matter what happened, I would land on my feet. And my parents did instill that in me. It happened through most of my life. I had hits, I had misses, and so what? So on to the next. And I don't know, retirement to me was, let's see what this is like. And it turned out not to be what I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. You went through the process, you did some of the things, and your curiosity led you to your next thing. That curiosity of joining the writing club and leaning into that led you to publishing a couple of books at 77. That's crazy.
Well, something else happened too. My wife and I were friends with this couple, Bunny and Christopher, who lived up in Portland. And Bunny worked for the local PBS station up there, and Christopher was an actor and a film director. And my wife actually did a George Winston special in Hawaii with them that she put together. And we became friends with them. And we're in Ashland. And we get a call from Christopher who says, I'm coming down to Ashland. I own the rights, the audio rights to Winnie the Pooh, and I'm going to license it to an audiobook company down there called Blackstone Audio. Well, I'm down there. Can I stay with you guys? So we said, of course, Christopher. So Christopher stayed with us, had his meeting, licensed Winnie the Pooh to Blackstone. And while he was there and meeting with the owner of the company, Craig Black, he mentioned Deborah and me, and said to Craig, they've got New York corporate experience that no one in your company has, and they're the kind of people that won't change your company, but rather would add to it. You really should meet with them. And so the next week we had lunch with Craig, and at the end of the lunch, Craig said, if you're open to it, I want to hire both of you as consultants. I don't really know what I'm going to do with you, but I know we need what you've got. And so we went on his first ever board of directors, and Deborah and I started consulting to Blackstone. Deborah retired fully about a year or two later, and I have been with the company now for 18 years. About 2 years later, I became a full-time employee, and I'm head of new business development there and enjoying the hell out of it.
Wow. How fortuitous that is.
Yeah, totally.
That's so interesting. And it sounds like you're making an impact in the kind of work that is fulfilling.
I like to think so. I like to think that, among other things, one of the more important things I'm doing is enabling really good authors to bring their books to the public and get them seen. And I find that quite fulfilling. And again, it was just a matter of two beliefs. One, something will happen, it'll be good. And two, I'll land on my feet and enjoy it. And so why not go after it?
I love that. So Rick, now you had a career-long production career, semi-retired. You've authored a couple of books. You've worked over a decade with this publishing company. All of these things that have sort of come full circle to where you are today. How do those experiences sort of shape where you go from here?
No clue where I go from here. It may not be anywhere other than what I'm doing till the day I pass. I don't know. I kind of to partially answer the question, earlier last year, I wrote, recorded, and sang. It was all kind of like a spoken word song rather than a full out, you needed to be a hell of a singer to sing this song kind of song. And I recorded that in my home studio, and I put it out, and it went to number 4 on the world indie charts. And it's a rock and roll record, sort of reminiscent of Deep Purple and Bon Jovi, if you will. That's at least what people told me. So on one hand, I'm still writing, I'm still recording, and I'm also working as an executive. And I've also, here where I live now, I've joined a number of different groups. And so, I get bored really easily. So it's like, this is fun. I'm having the time of my life right now.
I love that. So Rick, if you were to offer advice to someone who is in a place that you were in, where they're contemplating retirement and maybe have spent their career in an industry is being disrupted and is changing, and they're contemplating retirement, and they feel like they don't have the energy in doing what they were doing, but they're sort of trying to figure out, if I am going to continue to work or do something, like what advice would you offer them with your experience?
Try to find something that you can get passionate about. That would be number one. You don't want to go from a bad situation to a worse situation. I would say, secondly, be proactive. If you really want to do something more with your life rather than just sit back and chill, and there's nothing wrong with sitting back and chilling for someone who wants to do that, be proactive. I mean, get your name out there. There are companies who I would say engage in ageism. And then there are companies that don't. And it's a matter of finding, whether it's working for yourself or working for a company that's open to seniors or however old you are at the time. Go for it. See what interests you. And, if what interests you is playing golf every day, then go play golf every day. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
So are there other opportunities that you said no to? I'm just curious. It sounds like you said yes to a lot of things. What are some things that you've said no to?
At a record company in Minneapolis, because I went there in October and the snow was piled so high that you couldn't see the corners. And I said, this is not where I want to live, in spite of it being a fabulous city. And I know that it is. That was way too cold and snowy for me. I said no to that. I have not said no to very many things in my life, mainly because I view life as an adventure. And, if you say no, you stop having adventures.
Well, you're on a new adventure. I was just listening to a podcast where you interviewed Clive Davis, and you mentioned you also interviewed Whoopi Goldberg.
I will be, yes.
You will be. How did you get into podcasting?
I guess the best answer is I just did it.
Which is your mantra.
Yeah, kind of. Back when I first joined Blackstone, and there were starting to be podcasts in the very early days of podcasting, we did some audio podcasts with some of the authors whose audio books we were distributing and marketing. And I did some of those interviews, and I really enjoyed it. I like talking to people. I like finding out what makes them tick, and like you do. And so a few years later, maybe a decade later, I realized I was working with all these really cool authors, and I wanted to help further expose them. So I said, what the heck, let me start interviewing them, other people interview them. And so I started this chapter and verse interview series, initially interviewing authors, P.C. Cast, Rick Pickett, who wrote Sideways, Catherine Coulter, Heather Graham, and others. And then it just grew from there. And I just enjoy it because I like talking to people.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a learning process that occurs also when you're talking to people and hearing their stories. I love that process where you sort of see that evolution, and I always sort of come back to some relatable kind of experience, and that journey is really cool. So you started podcasting, you started having these conversations with authors. How do you get to Clive Davis? Like, how does that happen?
Well, that was the easy one because I worked for Clive for 2 years and I worked with Clive for 12 years. And he and I always had a fabulous relationship. And so I contacted his PR person, told him who I was, and said, if you go to Clive, I have the feeling Clive would be okay with me interviewing him. And he very much was so. In fact, we may be doing a second one. Most of the people that I've interviewed are either people whose books I've acquired or who I've worked with. There's one rock singer who will be unnamed who I did not work with, who is the only one who has ever turned me down. But, such is life. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Do you have to ask? You have to
Yeah,
ask.
exactly. But Clive was easy because of our prior relationship.
Mm. Well, I love that, Rick. I love how your story has evolved to where you're doing little bits of work in the things that find meaning, that are meaningful to you. And I love that you're bringing people's stories to the world and in their journeys. I enjoyed listening to your interview with Clive Davis. He's such an icon.
Yes.
And I am looking forward to hearing, when do you interview Whoopi Goldberg?
Not sure yet. Probably going to be when the paperback to her Bits and Pieces memoir, which is a New York Times bestseller, I think that comes out later this year. So I'm going to try to time it to that. Yeah, so there'll be some good ones. I'm also going to be interviewing a woman named Kelty Knight, who is an absolute dynamo. If you've never heard of her, you will,
Hmm.
and a number of others.
Yeah. Rick, I see in the background there's a lot of gold records behind you, and I'm sure they're works that you're incredibly proud of. What does that symbolize?
Well, it kind of symbolizes the years I was in the record industry. I'm proud of both the acts where I had a really instrumental hand in helping start their careers. I'm proud of the films that I did a lot of work on their soundtracks, not the recording of, but the promotion, marketing, and sales of. And I'm just proud that I was able to accomplish something. I'll tell you what I am most proud of in my record industry years career is I never knew how many people until I got on social media and people started contacting me that I had lost track of for a number of years or decades, how many people said that I mentored them. And I always wanted to mentor people, and I've done that at Blackstone. And it's always been important to me to help people succeed. And I think of everything I'm proudest of, that may be number one, is making an impact on other people's lives. But in terms of these gold and platinum records, it's just, that was a significant part of my life. And I have to juggle my feelings of whether I'm showing off or whether it's just, okay, this is my legacy, and so far legacy has won.
Yeah, I love that. I think it is hard sometimes to show off your work because you don't want to come across as almost bragging to some degree. And I appreciate you saying that. But the fact of the matter is, you've touched so many people's lives and you've made such an impact in people's lives in varying stages of their career. And I love that story where, you're now on social media and you're sharing stories of people you're interviewing on your podcast and promoting the work that they're doing. And you almost are establishing a community. You have this community of people that have been with you at varying stages of your career. And you're incredibly passionate about the work that you're doing. I just love that.
So do I. So we're aligned that way.
Yes. So, Rick, if there's the best way that people can get in touch with you, I know that you're in so many different places. If someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they find you?
Well, my website is rickbleiweiss.com, and and my an email they can connect with me at is createdbyrick@gmail.com, and that would be the two easiest ways. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, TikTok, X. So
You name
always
it.
can find me there too. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. As my wife says, you're not exactly hiding from people.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Rick, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm incredibly grateful that you and I have connected and just really appreciate you sharing your story here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. You've asked some really nice questions, and I hope I haven't rambled on too much. But thank you.
You're an inspiration. I'm 53 years old, and reinvention is something that I think about on a regular basis because the world is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And the work that you do today is going to look different than the work that you do tomorrow, weeks, months to come. And so you have to always think about reinvention and reinvesting in yourself because change is constant.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, but I'll take it even a step further. And I think, and I'm not the first one to say this by any means, but that with AI, tons is going to change. Industries and employees won't exist in some cases. And so I think it's very important, especially for younger people, to really gauge where they can fit in that isn't going to be replaced by AI, and how can they use that to their benefit rather than as a threat.
Yeah, that's so true.
But it's a marvelous thing. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. That's a lot of fake stuff. But on the other hand, it's a marvelous tool as well.
It's so powerful. Well, Rick, I appreciate our conversation today. Really enjoyed it. I'm going to continue following your work.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, all the best in everything that you're doing, and look forward to the episode with Whoopi. And thanks again.
Oh, my pleasure. My third Scorpion book's coming out a year from next month, so I'm hoping that'll do nicely and having fun.
That's great. Well, thanks again, and thanks everyone for listening. Until next time.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment to say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of career transition and career development solutions. And if you'd like to hear more on Clocking Out, we'd love for you to take a second and click follow of your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. You can also watch the full episode on YouTube. Just search Clocking Out with Raymond Lee and hit subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to check out our episode polls or just drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you or someone you know has a story to share about navigating change, taking a risk, or rethinking your career, we want to hear from you. Head to the link in our show notes and fill out the form to be considered for a future episode. Until next time, remember, if you're just sitting there thinking that you're stuck or you're unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage yourself to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that genuinely matter to me most? Am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.